participant list. It's super
Yeah,
inconvenient.
yeah. We'll figure that out. We'll do it live.
Mhm.
Do you want to go ahead and get started? It's a few minutes after the hour now.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, let's get rolling. Cool. So, hey everybody, welcome to Frontend Columbus. This is another bi-weekly screencast. So, one thing we just wanted to lay out for you is the next time we're going to be doing our bi-weekly screencast is going to be on June 6th, and we're looking for a speaker. So, kind of dovetailing with that, if you would like that to be you, we would like that to be you. So if you have an idea for a talk or want to talk about a project or technology you're interested in or something kind of general purpose, just if you have an idea, pitch it to us. Shoot us a message on Meetup, or if you have any of our emails or want any of our emails or anything, just hit either myself, Marko, Alex, or Eric up, and we can get you plugged in here.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Jason. What's up?
Oh, hey. How's it going, Jason?
Hello. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
You too, man. And in this time of kind of craziness, we know that there's been a lot of changes in the job market. So if anybody's hiring, looking for folks, feel free to drop a link in the chat. I'm sure that, some of us might be looking or know people who are looking. So it's always good to kind of have those opportunities, high visibility, so that we can get those people who need them.
Goes both ways. If you're looking to get hired, drop your info in the chat.
Yeah, good point. Either way, we're here to make connections. So tonight, quick agenda. We are going to do 30-second lightning introductions. I guess I started everything a little early. Did I?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess maybe the first 15 minutes was just like social hour or whatever. But
just hanging out.
You left Cory off. Cory and I are co-presenting today.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, it is Marko and Cory Ehler. So I apologize. But anyway, so we'll do some quick introductions here. Then we'll talk about a little bit about accessibility. And then at the end, we're just going to have a little bit of time for everybody to kind of have just an open discussion, kind of whatever you want to talk about. So first, for the introductions, just take 30 seconds real quick and tell us your name, what you do, what brings you to Frontend Columbus, and what interests you about front-end development. So I'll kind of kick us off here. My name is Kevin McCartney. I am a senior software engineer at Insight. I work with Marko and Cory. And I also help organize Frontend Columbus. So that's kind of what brings me here tonight, as well as I actually haven't had a chance to watch them give this presentation. So I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about accessibility on World Accessibility Day. So what interests me about front-end development, I came from a design background. So it was kind of cool to see user interfaces come to life and build something you can interact with. So that's kind of my story here. Just to kind of switch it up, Alex or Marko, would you kind of mind directing traffic on doing intros, just so I can keep the slide deck up here and you guys can see the participant list?
Absolutely. I'm just going to go straight down the list in the order that I see it. So of course I'm first in that list. I'm right at the top. So I'm Marko. Hey. What do? I work with Kevin and Cory at Insight as a front-end developer. What brings me to Frontend Columbus? Well, I've always liked going out to community events, and the opportunity came up to help organize this one, so I jumped on it. I love working with JavaScript. It kind of like rekindled my love of programming. Historically, I came from a traditional computer science background and worked with Java for a couple of years and was getting burned out. found the world of JavaScript, and that got me really excited to write code again. So really just been enjoying the journey ever since. And then after that, we have Alex White.
Hey, I'm Alex. I'm a software engineer at PriceSpider. I'm also a co-organizer of Frontend Columbus, so that's what brings me here tonight. For what interests me about front-end development, I just really like being in a development space that puts me really close to the end users, the customers. I mean, front-end development's kind of a form of art. I think, you're creating something visual and people are consuming it, and it's really, you have a lot of direct impact on how people perceive what you make. And that just interests me a lot.
One thing I was going to throw out there, I forgot to say at the jump, if you, for whatever reason, don't want to do an intro or whatever, feel free to pass. No pressure. Just anyone who wants to share, feel free to tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yep. And just feel free to let us know in the chat if you want to be passed as well. Next up, Cory.
Hi, I'm Cory Ehler. I work with Marko and Kevin at Insight as a front-end dev. What brings me to Frontend Columbus? Marko asked if I wanted to join him in this presentation. No, I'm kidding. I've been to a lot of these meetups, and they're just a good way to be around like-minded individuals that kind of all do the same thing. What interests me about front-end development? I got into front-end development forever ago. It was a marrying of design and kind of the more technical side of things. It's been really interesting to see it kind of progress over the years. And I don't know, I really just like building things, and it's a way for me to like start kind of something from scratch and then see a finished product. That's it.
Cool. All right, next up, Phil Loveland.
Hey, Philip Loveland, platform software engineer at Willow Tree. I work with Jason. And then I had worked with Cory at Victoria's Secret for my internship. So I guess that kind of what brings me to Frontend Columbus. And let's see, interests me, I would say, I did a lot of Java development like in school and then my first year, my first job. So kind of getting more on the front end and getting the UI, get to interact with the stuff I'm working with is kind of what interests me about front end development.
Cool. All right, next up, Jason.
Hey everyone, Jason Rector. I'm a staff engineer at Willow Tree here in town, focused on front end. I'm glad to have a front end focus group here in town. I've presented to this group before as well. So that's what brings me here. And I just really like taking a design and bringing it to life, making it interactive. So yeah, that's it.
Cool. All right, next up, Dave. I think you might be on mute, Dave.
Hey, I'm Dave. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, I'm just a student to be a tech software developer at Tech Elevator. I'm in the learning .NET right now. I have a degree from OSU in philosophy and neuroscience. And before this, I was doing a whole lot of graphic design as well. Screen printing and designing like posters for concerts and stuff. So I'm really, I don't know, I'm attracted to the front end. I appreciate that a whole lot.
Sweet. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, I think we have definitely a bunch of people here with like an art background. I know Kevin went to school for that as well. All right, let's see. Next up, Lance.
Hi. Yeah, there you go. Hi, my name is Lance. I'm working for a company called PriceSpider. I'm actually from Southern California, but someone in my company's chat mentioned that this was happening, and I do a lot of front end and accessibility is something I'm well learned on yet, so I just wanted to learn some more about it. Went to University of California, Irvine. Also went to a web dev boot camp. So front end's kind of mostly where my experience has been, and it's really exciting just to have a very tangible results in programming the front end. So like I do something and I can actually show it to people. It's not like, oh yeah, I solved this problem in the back end where I can't show you what I did, but I did it.
Cool.
Definitely.
Is it? I gotta ask. Is it raining in Southern California? Because it's been raining nonstop for the last week on the East Coast, and it's just gonna keep raining for the next week. It's
I think it was raining a little earlier this week, but no clouds now.
nice. Yeah, it is. We are not looking out in Ohio. That's for sure.
Out of curiosity, we're in Southern California. I lived in San Diego for a couple of years.
Got it. Yeah, I live in Irvine, so that's in Orange County, and it's probably like
nice.
a 2-hour drive from SD.
Yeah, cool.
Marko, you don't look like you're in Ohio.
Oh yeah. Well, I am teleporting just for this talk, but you know, not everybody has powers like me.
Mm.
True.
All right. Next up, Zachary.
Hey, my name is Zachary. I'm also a student at Tech Elevator learning Java. I guess I'm participating in this since I've got my own GitHub page, which I enjoy building, which also kind of attracts me to front-end development. So I just like the immediate results when you build something and you can just click on the file and it pulls up. So that's really cool to me.
Cool. Thanks for joining. All right, next up, Burton. What's up, man? Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going.
Awesome. Well, I am Burton Smith. I am a senior software engineer for a company called Bunzel North America. I do full stack development for them, primarily on their e-commerce and the content management systems. What brings me to Frontend Columbus is I love front-end development. It is a really awesome ecosystem. I love that it has become its own ecosystem. It used to be the bane of everyone's existence. They're like, oh, we'll do the back end, and now we'll just hurry and get the front end out of the way. And now it's like its own thriving ecosystem. So I love learning about the front end of everything and being able to make magic on the web. I think that's pretty cool. You can make some pretty cool things on the web. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. Yeah, Burton did an awesome talk on web components and design systems, or 2019, I think it was. So yeah,
I was
love to have you back.
I was super shook after I heard that talk. Made me rethink a lot of things.
We're doing everything wrong.
Just a side little pitch here. I have probably in a matter of days, I will be releasing a design system built with native web components that is completely themable and customizable. So I'll put that out there when it's ready for consumption, so everyone can have fun with it.
Please do.
Website or something, drop a link in the chat, Burton.
What's that?
If you have a website or something for it, drop a link in the chat.
I literally just put it up. It's called Kickstand UI, kickstand-ui.com. And it has basically nothing in it, but that's the URL for it.
Nice.
Nice.
I put it up today, so it's gonna be fun. I'm excited about it.
That's cool. We'll have to check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just thinking about how I want to start either working on or contributing to an open source design system. So,
well, you're welcome to contribute to mine. I am happy to take pull requests.
All right.
If you want to join the team.
Cool. All right. Next up, Adam.
Hey guys, how's everyone doing? For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adam Dearduff. I'm a UX consultant at Insight. I work with have worked with several folks here. In Insight, part of our UX team is front-end development. So I call it from insights to interface, but we have research and strategy, design, and then front-end dev. And we've been recently kind of putting a line in the stand and making a big push towards accessibility and inclusive design as a best practice across the company over the last 2 months, I guess. And so I'm excited for this talk as well.
Yeah, just total disclosure, we did do this talk internally, so we've done it once already. So hopefully it's a little bit better now that we're doing it the second time. All right, let's see who's up next. Sean.
Hey, my name's Sean Malone. I'm a full-time graphic designer over at McGraw-Hill currently. I come to Frontend Columbus because I've always been interested in programming as kind of a side hobby, and it's started to get a little more interesting as I've started to pick up more, and I'm looking to make the full transition over to front-end development.
Awesome, man. Happy to have you. Thanks for joining. All right, let's see. Next up, Eric.
Me? Yeah, my name's Eric Katz. I'm a product manager now at PriceSpider. Before that, I was a software engineer and a strong focus in front end. So yeah, I love front end. It's amazing. The ability to kind of live in that space between design and code and be able to implement something that's tangible, I think is a talented thing to, not talented. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, love you guys.
Eric also helps co-organize this. I think he started it, so I don't know if you mentioned that, but
yeah, on and off. There's been like ruts where it's hard to get motivation and get things going, and then the other co-organizers, Marko, Kevin, Alex, and whatnot, we have really lifted a lot of the effort lately, so I appreciate them.
Well, we appreciate you too.
Team
All
effort,
right.
guys.
See, next up, Alex Cook.
Hi, I'm Alex Cook. I work also at PriceSpider with Eric and Alex and Lance occasionally. I am a product designer, and mostly Eric has tried to get me to come to a couple of these, and usually like I had some conflict, but there's nothing to do because we're in a pandemic, so no reason to not come. And mostly I think the interest for front-end development is anything that can kind of help me empathize and be on the same page with my developers that I work with is something that I try to seek out. Mostly if I'm designing, I want to make sure that I'm keeping their abilities and what they think and consider also as good practice in mind. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm sorry that you're cursed to work with Eric and Alex, but thank you for joining.
It's okay. Keep them in line.
Well, we try.
It is very upsetting. Did you make when Alex White came to PriceSpider, did you make him be like Alex 2 or something?
No.
Alex.
No, it's fine. I allowed him to have the space to be also Alex, but we have the Alex coalition, so we can't disagree.
There was a brutal battle, but we came to terms at the end, you know.
It's true.
All right, good.
It's Alex with like a squared, you know, together.
Nice. I like
You
it.
call him also Alex. I got it. Cool. All right, let's see. Next up, Joyce.
Hey, yeah, I'm Joyce. It's my first time here. I know you guys usually meet in person, but those hours really, I struggle to get there. So I'm just getting started. I'm interested in front end, but I have no experience or anything. So just listening.
Cool. Thank you for joining. Yeah, I think today's session is perfect for sort of like an intro to accessibility. So I hope you get something out of it. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.
All right, let's see. Next up, Dennis.
Hi, my name is Dennis. I'm also a student at Tech Elevator in the .NET class. I'm just trying to learn as much as I can. And in my previous roles, I worked a little bit with UI and UX teams, and what they did seemed really interesting. So trying to, I guess, bring it all together.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. All right, and then last up we have Vitaly, but I think he said in the chat that he's in a noisy environment. So I'm just going to wave and say, hey, Vitaly, thanks for joining. If you want to say anything about yourself in the chat, feel free to. Don't feel pressured to, though, if you don't want to. And that, did I miss anyone? I think that's everyone.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Well, with that, I will go ahead and hand it over here for the Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Marko, I'll let you go ahead and share for this. Yeah.
Sure. I think you have to stop presenting.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Stop my share here. All right. Should be good to go.
Alrighty. Just let me know when you can see my screen.
Looking good.
Looking good? All right. Cool. Well, welcome to Accessibility for Dev and QA. It's kind of like, this talk is meant to be sort of an introduction to accessibility, but there's sections of it that are geared specifically toward development and QA. So that being said, the other cool thing about today is that it is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So awesome. Yeah. Global Accessibility Awareness Day was, it was started by a blog post, I believe, and in like 2012 or something like that. And then it just got people talking, and through various networking, it just sort of became a thing that everyone started buying into and sort of like organizing events around. So it's a very like sort of unofficial holiday, but we thought that this would be a great opportunity, especially because it lands on a Thursday and we do our meetups on a Thursday, to do something around it. So yeah, thanks for joining. And I totally forgot to do introduction slides for myself and Cory, so we'll just use this slide. I know we just went around the room and did introductions, but I'll just say again, I'm Marko, and Cory is Cory.
Hi, I'm Cory.
Yeah, we both work at Insight, and accessibility kind of is an important thing on pretty much all the projects that we do. So we've gotten a decent amount of experience around it, and that experience is kind of like what drove us to create this presentation. So what we're going to be talking about today is basically we're going to define what accessibility is in the context of the digital realm. We're going to talk about why it's important for everyone. And then we're going to talk about what it actually means for us as developers when the boots are on the ground. And then we're going to share some educational opportunities that are pretty much all online, I think. Some of them are paid, most of them are free. So cool. So what is it, right? So broadly speaking, when we say that an application is accessible, we mean that its content is available and its functionality can be operated by literally anyone. So there's definitely a huge crossover here with inclusive design, which is a whole nother presentation that I won't get into today. But in other words, basically, it just means that everyone, including people with disabilities, can equally perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the websites, apps, and tools that we create. It also means that they can contribute equally without barriers. So sort of the key thing here is that, especially in the digital realm, websites and applications should be enablers for people with disabilities. They shouldn't be barriers. And it's important to remember that disability is context dependent. So the World Health Organization updated their definition of disability. And the definition that they go with nowadays is that it's not just a health problem, it's a complex phenomenon, reflecting on the interaction between features of a person's body and features of the society in which he or she lives. So basically what they're saying is that it's less a personal attribute and it's more dependent on context. And it really happens at the points of interaction between a person and society. So, and really when we talk about physical, cognitive, and social exclusion, that is really the result of those mismatched interactions. And since we're sort of the shepherds of, we create those interactions, it's kind of up to us to keep this in mind and build it into our workflow from day one. And just keep going down that path. It's important to remember that disabilities are diverse, right? So there's permanent disabilities. I think this is probably what we traditionally think of when we think of disability, is sort of, you might be blind, you might be deaf, maybe you have ADHD, but there's also temporary disabilities, right? So maybe you have a cataract or something. Maybe you have an ear infection that week. Maybe you're a new employee at a company. And there's also like situational disabilities that might just last a couple minutes or an hour or something like that. Maybe you're a distracted driver. Maybe you're a bartender in a noisy bar. Or maybe you just have a lot of stress and anxiety that day. So disabilities, they kind of like, you can start to see where the traditional notion of what you associate with a disability can really be challenged. And this is sort of why it's important to make sure that we take accessibility into account when we develop applications. Luckily, we have the web content accessibility guidelines that we can reference when we are building applications. So the WCAG guidelines are developed through the W3C process in cooperation with individuals and organizations around the world with the goal of providing a single shared standard for web content accessibility that meets the needs of individuals, organizations, and governments internationally. And this is really great because W3C also develops all the other standards for the web APIs that we use every day. So the WCAG standards have sort of become like the de facto benchmark to measure your application's accessibility against. And when we're going to talk a little bit about the different tools that you can use to audit what you've been building, and all of those for the most part are based off of these guidelines. So the WCAG guidelines, they're based broadly based. They're really dense, and there's a lot of information there, and it can be really overwhelming. But at a top-down level, they're based on 4 principles of accessibility. So all of the success criteria under that, they're organized around these 4 principles, and those lay the foundation necessary. So the first principle is that applications should be perceivable, which means that information and user interface components, they have to be presentable to users in ways that they can perceive. So that could be obviously, like, you have to be able to see or hear, or there has to be some sort of sensory input for you to be able to see the application that you're interacting, or perceive the application that you're interacting with. Next, they have to be operable. So this just means that user interface components and navigation have to be operable. That's pretty self-explanatory. They should work, right? And they should be usable by everyone. Everyone should be able to operate them. They have to be understandable. So there has to be a reasonable expectation that the operation of the user interface has to be intuitive to some degree. And you can start to see where there's a lot of crossover here with just user experience in general, right? The whole goal is to make things as usable as possible to where you don't need a training guide to be able to operate a website. So there's major crossover here with this tenet of accessibility. And then lastly, they have to be robust. So they have to be robust enough to be interpreted reliably by a variety of assistive technology. And this is the one that's probably most salient to us as developers. There's all sorts of tips and tricks, but today we're really going to dive into some of the foundational things that we can be doing as developers to make sure that what we're building is accessible. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Cory for this section.
Are you just going to click through?
Yeah, just cool. Yell at me if I've messed up the slide transitions.
Hey, Marko. Why is it important to everybody? It is important that the web be accessible to everyone in order to provide equal access and equal opportunity to people with disabilities. An accessible web can help people with disabilities participate more actively in society. When we're building our applications, it's really important that we care about our users, not the happy path users, but the, every potential user that is going to come to your thing. It's all about inclusion. It's all about gaining empathy for your ultimate customer. Here are some stats, accessibility by the numbers. Worldwide, there are over 1 billion people that have some form of a disability. Largest group represented are people with cognitive disabilities. In the United States alone, there are 61 million people that have some form of a disability. An interesting fact about that, of the working age post-tax dollars, the people with disabilities in the United States generate about $500 billion. These are not people with disabilities that are unable to do anything. These are working people that probably work with you and I and everybody. You may not know they have it, you may not, but either way, you need to care about them. In the United States, there are 1 million people that are considered legally blind. Another interesting piece, only 39% of employees have disclosed to their manager that they have a disability. So while these numbers seem very high, in actuality, they're probably much larger. It's just that people don't disclose that they have a disability. Between now and 2060, there is an age bracket, 65 and older. Currently, it's at 43.1 million, and it's going to jump to 92 million. Currently, that's about 1 in every 7 people, but then it's going to be 1 in every 5. And then there's an age bracket from 85 and older that are going to triple from 5.9 to 18.2 million. This is important because these are the people with eyesight that's starting to fade. These are the people who, may not have as good dexterity with their fingers, or, they might start to develop cognitive issues. These are the people that are also going to be using your applications. And so you need to start to care about these people as well. When you're talking about click targets on buttons, make it a little bit bigger because someone might not be able to click on it. When you're talking text font size, things like that, make it a little bit bigger so that someone, every time I go eat with my mom, she has to put on reading glasses because she can't see a menu, like stuff like that. That's just something that you need to start to care about.
Yeah, these people are us. I mean, we're future proofing the internet for ourselves in a lot of these cases. And this is where like that underreported stat really comes into play, where like your vision starts to weaken as you get older. You might not necessarily disclose that to your manager. Maybe you just have a large monitor and you sit kind of close to it. It's not something that you need to disclose necessarily. Maybe you use the Zoom feature in the browser, but these are all things that are really important when we're considering the audience that we're building for.
Yes. Some ROI, beyond just empathy for your users. If you need to make a sell to your boss or whatever, here are some things that you can use as ammo. So there's an increased market reach. Over 60 million Americans have at least one disability. It's about 1 in every 5 people, and it's the fastest growing group of minorities today. Beyond that, they generate about 220 billion discretionary income. So if you work in e-com or anything like that, you're really just saying, I don't care about $220 billion of potential cash flowing through your application. It enhances your brand. A research study of Fortune 100 companies indicate that disability inclusion as part of an overall diversity strategy was a common practice among high-performing businesses. This is a thing that you're seeing more and more and more. A lot of big hitters, heavy hitters, are really starting to talk about accessibility and why it's important, and you should be too. It also helps to drive innovation. Accounting for accessibility features and products often solves unanticipated problems. This is huge. If you start to look at your application not on a happy path, but more so like with an accessibility lens, you'll start to see, oh, well, maybe that font color isn't the correct font color to use, or maybe this button placement isn't the correct button placement. You start to uncover problems that you really had no idea you had until you started to look at it from a different lens. It also helps to minimize risk. Everyone's getting sued over these things. The legalities are huge. Many countries have laws already requiring digital accessibility, and the issue of increased legal concern. An accessibility report 2019 said 54.6 participants, they're accelerating their accessibility plans due to current litigation trends. It's definitely something that's on the radar of a lot of companies, and if it's not on your radar, I would highly recommend that you get it there. Next slide. Some technology partners that are leading the way. Here we have Microsoft, Apple, and Google, some of the heavy hitters in that world. Last year, Microsoft introduced their inclusive design. A handful of the images that we use on here and also our inclusive design presentation came directly from them. They've been making great strides, the last 2 years or so. Probably before that, but definitely more notable, and they're definitely touting, that they care more about accessibility now. Apple's cared about accessibility as long as iPhones have been around. They were one of the first to adopt screen readers. They have a lot of accessibility features built into the phone. So instead of it ringing, with an audible ring, it'll flash the camera flash. Things like that, that's just on the phone. VoiceOver on Macs is a great tool. The majority of us probably work on Mac computers. And so we have a screen reader built in, already ready to go. Google's done a tremendous amount of work with accessibility as well. A lot of their applications and things have a lot of accessibility stuff baked in. If you use Lighthouse, one of the testing tools that we'll get to here in a little bit, it uses Axe, which is another testing tool. So you have an accessibility audit built into Chrome. There's also a color contrast ratio tool that will check right in the inspect. We'll get into that a little bit as well. But Google's definitely making strides to help accessibility.
Yeah, I feel like we should have also put IBM on this slide, because IBM also is making really awesome strides, and they have awesome accessibility toolkit documentation.
Next year.
Yep.
Accessibility is a civil right. So we started to talk a little bit about the legalities. So in 1990, the American Disabilities Act, ADA, went into place, and it's a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. When it went into place, a lot of it was more around, you can't discriminate anybody based on anything. So you started to see a lot of the ramps on sidewalks have like the red markers or have the little bumps. You started to see a lot more at crosswalks, the audible noise when it's time that you can cross, things like that. The more recent trend that started to lend itself into websites. The public sector is an easy target for people, but big brands, Domino's, Winn-Dixie, Nike, Abercrombie, Victoria's Secret, a lot of local companies, a lot of huge companies are getting hit with lawsuits. In 2016, there were 262 lawsuits related to accessibility. In 2019, there were 2,235. That is a huge jump in 3 years. It's definitely something that people are looking into, and something that we need to start caring about. This quote down here from the director of accessibility at Apple, I really like. Accessibility is a core value at Apple, and something we view as a basic human right. Being able to use your application regardless of what's going on, having everyone have the same experience is huge, and it to them is a basic human right. It should be to us too. Is there like a transition on this one?
There is. This slide has a part two.
There it is. All right. So an example of some of the litigation. So last year, California had to dish out $66 million for an inaccessible website. They created a state park reservation system, and it was deemed that it was inaccessible. Because of that, they had to fork out a lot of cash. So these are real lawsuits, and people are making tons of money on these things. Not like they're not making tons of money; they are earning tons of money because it's their their right. They should be able to access the website just like everybody else. This is huge. You don't want your application to get sued because of something that you could have easily prevented.
Yeah, fun fact, my first taste of, accessibility and what it is, best practices and all that was when I worked at Abercrombie, and amidst all of this litigation. And like Cory said earlier, he was at Victoria's Secret when they were being litigated against. So
Philip can tell you all about fabric and all the fun stuff we had to do with accessibility there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Good
yeah,
times.
so this issue is very close to heart.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So what does accessibility mean for developers? So I really like this subquote as well. As technologists, it's our responsibility to build applications that are solutions rather than barriers for people with disabilities. And I truly do think that it is our responsibility to build digital experiences that are accessible to everyone. Putting all the litigation, all of the ROI, all of the business sense aside, it just is the right thing to do. So there's kind of, in the world of the web, there's sort of a direct mapping between users' needs here. So some users can't use a mouse, and for that they need keyboard support. Some users can't view a screen, and for that they need screen reader support. Some users can't see low contrast text, and for that they need high contrast text. Some users can't hear dialogue or music, and for that they need captions and transcripts. And some users can't understand complex language, and for that they need plain language. And so basically what we're going to be talking about today is how to bake accessibility into your workflow so that we can sort of hit all of those needs for the most part without adding too much additional overhead into your day-to-day. So the basics of how you would do that is you would, first and foremost, you use semantic HTML. That's sort of the most important thing. That's the foundation of it all. So things like screen readers and any kind of like accessibility software is gonna use semantic HTML to understand what it's looking at on the page. Second, we're gonna use ARIA attributes where they're appropriate. ARIA is basically, it's a spec of attributes that you can add to your HTML to add additional contextual information for assistive technology. We're going to use accessible colors. So contrast is really, really important. And Cory has a whole section where he's going to talk about that later. And then we're going to, later when we're QAing our stuff, we're going to test for keyboard navigation. So the best advice I can give you around that, and we'll get into that more later, is just test your stuff with a keyboard. If you can't get through it with the tab key and the enter key and the arrow keys, then chances are it's not accessible. Not everyone can use a mouse. Not everyone has the dexterity to use a mouse. So it's really important to make sure that your applications can be navigated using only a keyboard. And hopefully everyone has that. So you know, if it's a really low to the ground test that I think everybody can kind of do and has access to. And next, you don't want to disable zoom. So there's a ton of people that zoom in on applications when they use them because the standard size is too small for them to see. And then finally, we want to lean on automated testing tools. So accessibility is a journey. If you're new to accessibility, there's definitely a whole lot of knowledge to build up over time. But in the meantime, there's a whole host of great automated testing tools that you can lean on to sort of get some of the things that you're doing definitely wrong. You know, they'll definitely catch those things. So semantic HTML, right? So it is fundamentally designed to be accessible. I mean, it's what screen readers, it's what assistive technology uses to understand what it's looking at on the screen. So when we talk about heading levels, you know, H1s, when we talk about button elements, when we talk about, you know, tables and things like that, all of those are extremely useful to screen readers, and screen readers have short key macros and shortcuts that you can use to, for example, read all of the heading levels on a page all at once. And if you're not using semantic heading levels, then all of that context is gone for a screen reader. And lastly, it's actually really good for SEO. So if you care about search engine optimization, you want your site to show up high in search results, great, because semantic HTML is good for that too. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone in that regard. So let's take a look at, you know, why, like an example of how maybe, you know, with modern front-end frameworks, it's so easy to add like JavaScript binding to basically any element on the page. So the most basic element of all on the web, of course, is the div. So let's say we're designing a button or something like that for our website. Well, you know, we could put a click handler on a div, and if we aren't considering accessibility, this it seem adequate to us, right? We click on it with the mouse, something happens, cool, we're happy. But it's not actually being read out as a button to a screen reader, right? So what we can do is we can add a role of button to that div so that a screen reader recognizes it as a button. But actually, what we also need is we need it to be focusable. So when we're tabbing through the page, it totally skips over it because divs don't get put in tab order. Only focusable elements do, right? So we have to also use the tab index attribute to add a tab index of 0 to that div. All right, but what about the enter key, right? Buttons should activate when you press the enter key. So we have to add a key press handler. So that's a whole lot of overhead to add to a div to trick assistive technology into thinking that it's a button and give us the keyboard functionality that we're looking for when we button. So by using semantic HTML, we can make our lives a heck of a lot easier for ourselves, and we can get this, it's sort of the gold standard of support for assistive technology. So whenever you reach into your toolbox and start to put a div on the page, always challenge yourself and ask yourself if there's something with more semantic meaning that you could be reaching for instead. It's kind of an extreme example with a button, but there's all sorts of other things like field set, you know, especially when it comes to tables and things like that. Lists are a really common one. So it's very easy to reach for a div when we're arranging information that could easily be put into like a UL with LI elements and things like that. And just that little things like that are going to make a big difference for people using screen readers. They're like, for example, when a screen reader hits a list or a table, it's going to read out the number of rows. Really, really useful information that they're going to get out of that, as opposed to if we just use divs. So as an overview, you know, use container elements for layout only. Use other HTML elements the way that they're intended, and above all, use correct heading levels. So don't, if you're like new to heading levels, basically every page should have one H1, and then everything else should sort of just be a tree structure from there, where if you shouldn't skip heading levels, you shouldn't go straight from an H1 to an H3. So pretty foundational stuff. And all of that is going to help your SEO as well. So it's good. But if sometimes that's not enough, right? Sometimes we have really complex widgets in our applications. Like maybe you're thinking of like a calendar widget or something like that, or some sort of advanced time picker or something. And for those things, we have ARIA, which are a set of attributes that help to give additional contextual information to assistive technologies. So for example, if you have like a little popover or something like that, or you have a modal that pops up, you can use ARIA to give a screen reader additional information around like when an accordion is expanded versus collapsed, when a modal is open versus not open, what the user can expect to happen when they click on that when they're going through it with the screen reader. So ARIA is broken down into roles, states, and properties. Some of those things are really useful. Like if you have something that you want to hide from screen readers, you can use ARIA hidden. But it's important to remember that the best ARIA is really no ARIA at all. So this is sort of a last resort, and you don't want to overuse it. If you're already using semantic HTML, like if you have a semantic button on the page, you don't need to add a role button to it because the screen reader already knows that it's a button. So yeah, it is a really, really useful tool in your tool belt, but definitely it comes secondary to semantic HTML. So as an example of where you would use ARIA, here is sort of a button that doesn't have any text on it, right? So if we can imagine a button that's just like a heart to favorite something or to like a post or something like that. It's just probably going to have an image or an SVG or something inside of it. Read a semantic button, so that's good. The screen reader is going to recognize that, but when we're focused on that, the screen reader isn't going to have any idea what that button is doing, right? So to a sighted user, they're going to see that heart and they're going to associate that with like liking or favoriting because that's a really common interaction pattern that we see. But to a screen reader, it's not going to read it out as anything unless we add an ARIA label to it. So the ARIA label attribute tells the screen reader that the label of this button that it should read out is the word save. So great example of how we can use ARIA to add some contextual information to create that one-to-one experience between sighted users and users that can't see the screen and are relying on a screen reader. So keyboard navigation, I talked about this a little bit earlier. You should always ask yourself how a user can interact using only a keyboard. In fact, I challenge everyone to kind of like go through their day one day by just unplugging the mouse and trying to use nothing but the keyboard. Don't use your trackpad, don't use the mouse. See how much of your day-to-day you can get through without using a mouse. And it'll really start to kind of like build empathy around the pains that people feel who aren't able to use a mouse from day to day. So the most important thing is predictable tab order, visible focus state, and managing focus in dialogues and modals. So predictable tab order just means that if a user is tabbing through your application, your website, the tab focus is going to go from interactive element to interactive element. And we want to make sure that the DOM order that we have in our HTML sort of matches the visual order that we have on the screen. So that one's usually pretty easy, right? There's some circumstances where maybe that wouldn't be the case. Visible focus state, also very important. So there is, sort of your browser default focus state. It looks a little bit different in all the different browsers. Chrome's is that like blue sort of outline shadow that appears. I think Internet Explorer it's like a dotted line or something, I can't remember. But if you are overriding focus state on your website, you just want to make sure that it also has a high enough contrast that users can see it. You definitely don't want it can be very, very important so that a keyboard user knows where they are on the page. And then lastly, you do want to manage focus in dialogues and modals. So a lot of the times when we build dialogues, the actual markup for the dialogue is somewhere at the bottom of the page or something like that. And if you're using a mouse and you open a dialogue, you can just as easily click on some stuff inside of that modal because you can see it on the screen. But imagine you're using only a keyboard and a screen reader and a modal opens, but the focus doesn't move inside of the modal. Well, you'd have no idea that that modal is open, right? Maybe it's visually there on the screen, but to you, you're still just focused on the button that triggered it. And if you hit tab, you're just moving along the content behind that modal, behind whatever overlay is there. So it's really important to move focus into the modal when it opens, and then lock focus inside of it so that they can't tab out of it. So if they reach the end of focusable content within that modal, it just moves back up to the top. And then when they close that modal, we return focus back to wherever they came from. An example of why that is important is imagine you have a table, a focusable element a button that opens a modal, right? Say someone is tabbing through, they're on line 75 of your table, and they open a modal from that. Focus moves inside the modal, the modal closes, and all of a sudden focus is back on the top of the page. We don't want to force them to have to tab all the way back down. So it is definitely a usability concern in that regard. So basically, if you take focus away, put it back where it came from. And if you do have dialogues and modals, make sure that you're locking focus inside of them and you're moving focus inside of them when they open. Cool. And then with that, I will hand it back to Cory to talk about colors.
Okay. Oh, let's look at different stuff. When using colors in your application, it's important to note a few things that pertain to accessibility. So WCAG defines standards that measure the contrast ratios between foreground and background colors, both for AA and AAA compliancy. This is going to be measured based on the two colors' luminance. So while the colors may appear correct to you, they may not be, someone might not be able to differentiate the varying color states. It's important to not use colors as sole means communication. Next slide. So here are some of the color contrast ratios that are defined by WCAG. This is the 2.1, so this is, I think, the most up-to-date AA. So text regular is going to be pretty much most of the text that's on your application. It's also going to be any images that have text in them. So that needs to have a 4.5 to 1 ratio. And again, that's foreground to background, and it's based on the luminance of the color. Any large text is a little more lenient. So anything above 24 pixels gets 3 to 1. Anything that's bold text and above 18.5 pixels is also 3 to 1. And anything that'd be considered non-text, so like borders around inputs and things like that, that's all 3 to 1. AAA is a little stricter. So most of your text is going to be 7 to 1, which is a bump up from 4.5. Large text and bold text are now at 4.5 instead of 3, and the non-text is able to stay at just at 3, what it was before.
Yep, non-text includes things like icon buttons, focus states as well, and like error states if you have like a red error state or something like that on your form.
Yeah,
fields.
like borders around inputs and things.
Yeah.
So here's a chart that kind of shows the varying types of color blindness and then ways that users can interact with you. So on the left, you see someone that has a full color spectrum, what would be considered like regular vision, all the colors coming correctly. The next one over is called deuteranopia. It is when the retina is deficient in or lacks cone cells that detect the color green. The red, green color blindness. This one, the deuteranopia impacts roughly 6% of all men and about 0.5% of women. The middle one is called protanopia, and that's when the retina is deficient in or lacks cone cells that detect the color red. You can see both on these where red and green are. On the one on the left, it comes through. Protanopia isn't as common as deuteranopia, and it impacts about 2% of men and about 0.05% of women. The next one over is called tritanopia, sometimes referred to as blue-green color blindness to differentiate between the rare. It's a condition where blue appears to be green and yellow appears to be violet. This one's not linked to a specific gender, and it impacts roughly 1 in every 10,000 people. And then last, we have monochromacy. It's where you have complete absence of all color. This is the most rare, and it impacts somewhere between 1 in 30,000 to 50,000 people. Interesting tidbit about color blindness is it impacts anywhere between of the people on the field. On average, 2 people have some sort of color blindness. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So here's an example of why not to use color only as an indicator of status. Color is definitely important, but it can't be. So you can see here there are 2 graphs. They're noting kind of the status of some servers and whatnot. The one on the left would fail accessibility tests, whereas the one on the right would pass. The reasoning behind you'll see in a second, but colors as indicators, whereas the one on the right introduces icons. You can see here someone that has protanopia, they can't distinguish, the API from the dashboard from the gateway on the left, but on the right, they can see that there's that check. Yeah, API is good, gateway is good, dashboard, oh no, something's wrong. And so they can go in and they can quickly see that. Did you transition? Is he frozen?
He looks frozen.
Oh no. All right, we'll wait for Marko to come back. Someone.
At least he's not making a goofy face when he's frozen. He's pretty regal right there.
Yeah, that's true. Alex confirms he can't tell the difference. Was there a question? Sorry.
Oh, I was just joking. I was asking if there was a turbo button.
Oh. What's up, Fahey? I didn't see you join, man.
Yeah, nice to see you. I've been enjoying. I joined late. I caught right after you guys did introductions. I'm glad I didn't
one of those fancy Pelotons in the background there.
No, that is on, but I do use the Peloton app though.
Nice.
So I bought a TV and a bike versus an overpriced Peloton, like physical bike.
I think you're winning there, man. I think you did it.
Peloton basically has a TV on it, so.
I know, that's true.
Well, I mean, hey, roll your own.
Peloton shipping was like $300 or something like that, I heard. So I just heard shipping costs and I was like, yeah, I can't pay shipping costs.
For me, it's the $1 a month for the subscription. It's insane.
Yeah, the first 90 days were free, but then I don't know what it cost per month after that. I can't remember.
Marko just texted me, said his power went out. So I'll just drive the rest of this and wing his slides.
Perfect.
Oh my God. Sorry. So another reason to not use color as sole means of communication. You can see on the left, you kind of have like a email input. You'd have on pretty much every form. The one in the middle is going to fail. You can definitely see, if you aren't colorblind, that there's something going on. There's a red border that's being added to the thing, but someone who is colorblind might not be able to see that. The one on the right is going to pass. So not only is it including the icon that there's an alert going on, but it gives you that required notification above the field. Someone that has protanopia, they're gonna see that the border color of the inputs changed, but because they can't distinguish between red and green, they're not gonna know if it's good or bad. So adding in that required messaging and that icon is going to save your form there. Here's what it looked like for someone that has deuteranopia. There is a tool called a color contrast analyzer by the Paciello group. It's pretty nifty. You can specify a foreground and background color, and it'll immediately give you feedback as to whether or not you're compliant with WCAG standards. It also has a color blindness simulation tool. So if you have a kind of an interesting color palette like this one with like a mustard yellow and kind of this like burnt orange, and you want to, for whatever reason, put the text on top of that, you can run that through the simulator and it'll show you what varying color blindness tests would look like. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but Chrome DevTools has some accessibility stuff baked in. So there's a color contrast analyzer. So it's in the inspect tools. Firefox actually has one that they introduced not long ago as well. But if you click on a color inside the inspect tool, it'll give you the ratio of that. And it'll adjust itself. So if you're off by a little bit and you move, to a darker shade for a font color or something like that, it'll show you where you need to be to pass that compliance level. Another thing to note, don't disable zoom. Text might be too small for a user to read. There might be some, sometimes you see like fig captions on images. Someone might want to zoom in to see what that is, just because it's kind of typically a little bit smaller anyway. So under WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines, text needs to be resizable up to 200% without the loss of content or functionality. If you're going to disable zoom, at least give them 200% so that the people that need to zoom in can still interact with your application. So use of automated testing tools. There's some static analysis tools that will look through your HTML and CSS and give you kind of some errors that you have. Axe Core is a great tool. You can build it part of your CI pipeline. There's an extension for Chrome. And there's a lot of ways that you can utilize it. It's also baked into Lighthouse, which is Google's. It's like so if you haven't used Google Lighthouse, I'd after this meeting, go check it out. It's a really useful tool that just comes along for free with Chrome. Wave is a great extension as well. Wave will give you issues, like if you're missing headers or you're missing alt tags, things like that. And then there's some framework specific tools as well.
Yeah. So, hey, I'm back.
Hey,
Sorry,
there
my
it
internet
is.
went out. Yeah. Let me just add a couple of things to that. So like for the framework specific tools, if you're using a framework, definitely check those out. There's all kinds of ways that you can automate your accessibility and your CI/CD, like Cory was talking about. Angular, for example, has like a protractor accessibility plugin. There's Ally Suite for Polymer and web components. Angular itself has a really awesome Ally CDK, where there's all sorts of really useful utilities and things like that for building accessibility into your apps. They have like a live announcer that you can use to programmatically announce things to the screen reader. There's like a focus trap thing that can aid you in some of the more complex focus management things that we were talking about earlier. And yeah, like Cory was saying, Google Lighthouse built right into Chrome. Google Lighthouse, after you run the audit, also if you expand the manual testing accordion in there in your audit results, there's a link to a really good article with some videos on how to do an accessibility audit. So if it's something that you want to bring back to your team, but you're not really sure how to run an accessibility audit, there's a neat little playbook there that you can follow. Did my internet die again?
I see you.
Oh. Okay. I think my internet might die at any second, but anybody hear me? Cool. Cool. So yeah, so manual testing tools, that's sort of the other side of the coin. Whereas automated testing tools, they're going to tell you what you did definitely wrong. They might not necessarily tell you what you did definitely right. There's multiple right answers to a lot of stuff. Like it can be kind of frustrating when you're looking at the WCAG guidelines and you kind of wish everything was black and white and you just had a checklist.
Did we just lose them?
Yeah.
Oh no.
There's no more research to be done. There's no more user testing to be done. That's not going to happen in the same way that that you can't solve accessibility necessarily, because you're still building experiences. You're just building experiences for a more inclusive audience. So manual testing tools, the primary ones are going to be screen readers. Two of the most popular ones out there are JAWS and NVDA. JAWS is paid, NVDA is free, I believe. There's probably a bunch of other ones. Those are the two that I like to use to test. And then finally, there's keyboard only testing, which super easy. You don't need anything. Assuming you already have a keyboard, you can get started testing for accessibility right away by just going through and making sure that you can go through your stuff with the keyboard. Cool. Another thing I would really advocate for is building accessibility into your design system. So if you have a design system and it's built with accessibility in mind, you already have a really strong foundation to build accessible applications. Now, that's not to say that if you have accessibility built into your design system that you're all of a sudden immune to building something that's not accessible. You can definitely build a non-accessible experience using an accessible design system in the same way that you can build something that's completely unusable using, Google's material or like anything else, right? You can still compose those things into something that doesn't make sense. So it does lay a great foundation, and chances are if you have a design system that you custom built, it probably has a documentation site too. And that's a great place to put accessibility documentation, whether that's links to webinars, you know, continued education, things like that, articles, whatever it is, guidelines. Great place to put that, so you have that central watering hole of information for your organization. Next slide. And then, yeah, finally, yeah, there's no silver bullet, kind of what I was alluding to earlier. It is an extension of user experience, and it takes time and attention to detail to get right on every project. That's why it can sometimes be frustrating when you do manual testing. There's always a little bit of preference and opinion and bias injected into the results of having an individual audit your stuff by hand, because in the same way that when you hire a designer to design an experience for you, they're going to inject some level of problem solving to solve that, because there's multiple right answers, right? Sometimes there's multiple right ways to create an experience that is accessible for people with screen readers and is accessible for people who are, you know, have problems with contrast and things like that. So there's no silver bullet. It can't just be solved overnight. It does take that specific attention. So if that does feel frustrating, just think of it as an extension of UX. And if you are, you know, consider yourself a UX practitioner, that helps to put it into a context that is a lot more palatable, I think.
We're always here for moral hugs too. So
yes.
If you guys want to give us, if you need a hug or something, reach out, and
yeah.
we got you.
Yeah, and the contrast to that is like the litigation aspect of it, where it's like, of course, every company wants to be 100% accessible so that they don't get sued, but there's no such, and anyone will tell you, there's no such thing as 100% accessibility, because there's always things that you could technically be doing better unless you just have black and white text on a white background, right? In the same way that you're always iterating on making your user experience better, right? Otherwise, you know, why do we do what we do, right? I mean, if you're an e-commerce site, you're always trying to move that needle. There's always ways that you could be improving what your customers are interacting with. So if you're putting forth that good faith effort, I think that's really what you should be doing. So lastly, resources, right? So we're going to talk about some online resources, some professional certifications, and other ways to grow your knowledge if you're interested in getting more into accessibility. DQ University, they're a leader in the accessibility space, and they make a bunch of really awesome tools for static analysis and things like that. And they also provide free webinars and courses around accessibility. Their curriculum is kind of divided up among tracks geared more toward designers, where you're going to be talking about accessibility concepts in sort of like a non-technical sense, but at the design and conception phase. Your developer tracks, where you're going to be diving into the nitty-gritty of the implementation details, and in management track, where it focuses on how to pivot your organization to incorporate accessibility into the product lifecycle in a sustainable way, how to mature your organization in accessibility. I think a lot of companies kind of are coming to terms with needing to be accessible really fast, and they're leaning toward third parties to come in and consult on that. But long term, it really makes sense to own it yourself, right? So if you are a manager and you are looking to create that sort of sustainable, that sustainable product lifecycle track, that those courses kind of like speak to that and how you can sort of build the training and build that foundational knowledge within your organization. Next slide. Finally, there are some really deep dive certifications that you can get if you're super serious about accessibility and you sort of want that to be your career track. Highly recommend getting these. They're very intense. There's probably months of material here that you would be sort of consuming and studying and leading up to these exams. The exams are proctored, and I think they're like 3 hours each or something like that. There's the Web Accessibility Specialist exam, which is basically sort of like the developer track one. And then there's the Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, which is less technical. It's for sort of like your management, your project leadership. And I think if you have both, then you get a third special title, which is escaping me. But these are both offered through IAAP, which is the International Association of Accessibility Professionals.
Aren't these like around $1,000 too? I think.
Yeah, they're expensive. If you have some sort of training budget through your work, you could start that conversation off with your manager. They are expensive, but I think at this point, especially given the trend in accessibility, your organization might they might be keen to sort of put you on one of these tracks. Again, though, it does take a lot of time, dedication.
$1,000 is way cheaper than 66 million.
That's a good way to put it. You can try to sell it to your manager that way. Yeah, certainly. So some helpful links. The first link there is to what I was talking about earlier, Google's sort of playbook guide for how to review a site for accessibility. This is also linked out to from Google Lighthouse results when you run an audit on a page. The second link is a list of Ally courses and free webinars and things like that on GitHub that we found. I don't know who the author of that repo is. I don't know them personally, but it's a really great list of Ally things online that you can find. And by the way, I don't think we ever mentioned what Ally is. So there's 11, Ally just stands for accessibility, and there's 11 letters between A and Y in the word accessibility. And there's like I forget what that's called. It's like a numera something.
Numeration.
If you've ever seen like I-18N for internationalization, it's the same thing. So, and then finally, DQ, also with those paid courses, they also have webinars that they host online as well. So
I think the majority of those webinars are free. So
yeah, check those out. Those are all good stuff to have. That was a lot of talking and an accidental intermission, but time for questions.
I've got one quick one. Over at McGraw, we're currently dealing with a fair amount of accessibility issues with our older platforms. And I've come to notice that there isn't really a difference between the A, AA, AAA, unless it denotes something with color. Are you guys familiar at all if there's any kind of functionality quality that's associated with those?
Yeah, so I think there's really strict guidelines around like captions and things like that with AAA. I've never actually encountered I've never worked on a project where AAA has been a requirement. I've always worked on stuff that's AA. Like most like consumer public facing stuff is going to be AA. So is McGraw-Hill AAA on some things?
They keep talking about trying to achieve that, but our benchmark at the moment is AA.
Yeah, I mean, any kind of like educational and government, I figured would be like where you would run into that AAA. I haven't personally worked on it, but my understanding is that in addition to the contrast stuff, it is just way more intense in every way. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you, but it's if you're trying to discern how much of a lift it would be, I would guess it would be a really heavy lift.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've always been told AAA is like something that you strive towards, but not to call it unachievable, but for lack of a better term, that's what it is. It's just the strictest of strict standards. And we kind of noted on this earlier, but a lot of, once you get past just the color contrast rules and things like that, a lot of what is deemed accessibility is subjective. You'll hear one answer from one person and another answer from another person. I would say you're probably good with AA. I mean, I've never heard or worked anywhere that they require AAA. And even then, like, I don't even, aside from like some of the stuff that's noted that we talked about in this presentation, like, I don't even know what you would need to do to hit AAA.
Yeah, it's subjective in the sense that like if you're a developer and you're developing a comp, you might develop it slightly differently than the developer sitting next to you. Like there's tons of guidelines and things like that. It's just that there's multiple paths to right answers.
For sure.
In a lot of those cases. So.
It's more about like techniques. There's lots of different ways to do the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
So I joined sort of late, but I had I guess I had one question really about accessibility when it comes to how do you manage making sure that the experience is the same across browsers. 'Cause that's something that I ran into when I worked on a project a couple of years ago, where I had to support, I believe it was Chrome, Firefox, and then Internet Explorer 11. And the difference between using JAWS in Internet Explorer 11 versus using something like VoiceOver with a Mac was night and day. And I remember IE 11 being a big pain in the ass, excuse my language.
Yeah. So a couple of pieces of advice for that. Some of those things have been fixed with the more recent 2020 release of JAWS. So update to the latest version for sure. And then when it comes to things like that, try to focus your testing and your development efforts off of like empirical data of what your users are using. So if you know that the majority of your users are using one screen reader over another, focus on fixing issues with that one. It can be frustrating. Like the way that web accessibility works is there's an accessibility API that browsers will basically expose to screen readers, and then screen readers will read from that API. So certainly supporting IE 11 can be frustrating with JAWS. I have to do that on my current project as well, and there's definite differences between Chrome and IE 11. We do have it on our roadmap to move off of IE 11, and we're just kind of like sort of like taking it in stride and like tracking some of the defects without fixing them while we wait to move off of it. But yeah, you kind of just have to pick and choose and base your development effort and your testing. Like there's no silver bullet with that. You sort of have to just dig through it and address it on a case-by-case basis, unfortunately. And then rely as much as you can on like your compiler, right? So on your build system. So if you can polyfill like CSS functionality and things like that, rely on that.
Yeah, this unfortunately, thankfully I no longer work at this company. Not to, I don't want to badmouth them too much, but I had no sort of build system, linting. A lot of that was basically non-existent. And so how I had to sort of debug issues with IE 11 when it came to accessibility was, and mind you, we were working with a hospital system, and they had one employee that needed the stuff to be optimized for a screen reader, which is fine. But of course they were using IE 11 because it's a locked down, hospital system, and IT. I think maybe IE 11 has a lot of like enterprise stuff for restricted environments. And so I basically had to go off of reports that they would send me, or that they would send to our company, and basically say like, I could do this much, but here's the things I still can't do. And so it's kind of like going down the checklist and trying to make sure that I can at least, do all these things that this user is supposed to be able to do. And then we'd have a QA resource like check that and try to do the same thing. And it was a really ugly process, but I think you're right. Like if you have access to be able to use like bundlers and linters and stuff like that, and like polyfills, that makes the situation a lot easier. But
yeah,
mine was very much an outlier, and so it doesn't necessarily speak to every situation.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that it sounds like was going right in that situation is that you were soliciting feedback from actual users who use the screen readers, because ultimately, we're talking about building something for a set of users, and if we need to be running usability on those. So if you have users who actually use screen readers every day, that's sort of the gold standard of being able to put something in front of them and see how they use it, and use that feedback to improve. The other thing I'll say is that you can also automate accessibility linting into your pipeline as well. Like the Axe Core NPM package is free. It's easy to integrate into unit tests. If you are using a headless browser, basically you can render each component or each page in isolation in the headless browser, run the accessibility testing tool on it as a part of your unit test, and then you can fail your builds if you miss something really low to the ground, like forgetting to put an alt tag on an image or something like that.
Another good one is Pally, P-A, it's like 11Y, Pally. You can integrate that as part of your CI build as well. Build pipeline.
That's a good idea as well. I had never thought of using a headless browser and like running your tests against that. I mean, I think I used the React Ally extension for linting, but I mean, that only does so much. But you're right, running your tests against a headless browser or like accessibility tests would really help there.
Yeah, or end to end. I mean, if you have end to end tests that are running in like an actual instance of Chrome or something like that, you could do the same thing there. The other thing I'll say is that trying to go back and fix accessibility issues after the fact is going to always be more expensive than building it into your definition of done up front. So if you include it in your baseline standard of quality, you're going to save money in the long run as an organization, because your developers are going to learn what not to do right off the bat, right? So if there's some accessibility bad practice that they're perpetuating and you wait until the end of whatever your project is to finally audit your application and you get thousands of issues, you could have nipped that in the bud right away in the first sprint if by running some sort of accessibility audit, learning upfront, and then upskilling your developers as you go.